It certainly has helped me. Now when I make yarn purchases, I feel like I can do so being a little bit more informed about how the yarn behaves. Hi, and welcome to Ruka Knits. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about what I learned knitting up my mono boxy cardigan. I learned that I don't know anything about yarn. So in a nutshell, what happened was I basically had a yarn in mind that I wanted to use for this project. It's the Malabrigo Mecha, or Mecca, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I had used this yarn to make a scarf as a gift a couple years ago, and I had just enough of this yarn left. I had weighed it out to make the extra small version of this mono boxy cardigan. I also had this Peer Gynt. I had bought it to make a hat project that I never ended up making, and the two look so gorgeous together. So I was like, that's great. I'll make the cardigan with these two yarns. However, what I didn't know was that this Peer Gynt it's Norwegian wool, and it's amazing for structured knits because it does not drape. Superwash, however, and I feel like I should have known this, superwash drapes a lot. It has basically been treated so that it can go through the wash. I think that's technically why it's called superwash. So pairing this with a very rigid yarn, not so great. And I actually didn't really think about it or realize it until I went to block this cardigan. I don't know if you've ever tried to block, like actually wet superwash and then try and block it. The yarn is a bit of like a pancakey mess, and you have to work really hard to kind of keep it together and push it together and you know, bring the shape back. I found that all the edges, all the cuffs that I made in the Peer Gynt were perfect. There's no issues. It just kind of keeps its shape. You take it out of the water and it springs back into, you know, into the shape that it has. Superwash, however, does not. And so I went down a bit of a rabbit hole researching the different yarns because it became fairly obvious to me that I don't know what I'm doing. The gist of it is I basically paired two yarns together that were a bit of a mismatch in terms of the way they behaved. And I think it's the yarn behavior that's more helpful to me than the fiber itself. Like the fiber doesn't really tell me much. I don't really know what is going to happen with the final garment. And this project kind of was a big unlock because what I've learned is you can swatch all you want. Like I swatched this, but this is very light. It's not the finished garment because it just doesn't have gravity affecting it the way that this final cardigan does. So to help me choose the right yarn and not make this mistake again, I've plotted the different fibers on a spectrum ranging from the most rigid, so very structured, to the least rigid, and this is yarn that tends to drape. So on the rustic side, you have your Shetlands and your Highland wools, and then on the drapey side, you have the alpaca blends. And unfortunately in this project, I paired a rustic yarn with a superwash one. Rustic yarn, under the microscope, you see have these coils, which is why that yarn tends to, you know, have what's called memory, meaning those springs, even if you stretch it, even if it gets wet, even if the garment is bigger or, you know, gravity doesn't affect it because those springs just make it spring back into shape. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, these fibers on our microscope are straight. They don't have the same coil or spring, and so they tend to drape. If we look at the outer shell of these fibers, on the structured side, so the more rustic fibers, they have these scales that allow them to kind of stick together, creating that idea of memory. Whereas on the drapey side, or the fibers with least amount of memory, they don't have those scales. And when it comes to the superwash, those scales have actually been chemically treated or coated to be removed, which is what makes a superwash soft and creates draping in those garments as well. And the bigger the garment, the more weight. You mix that with gravity and it's draping or blooming even more. And so I plotted the different types of yarns that I tend to work with on the spectrum so that the next time I go to make a project, I feel like I can make a much more informed decision. You know, if I'm doing fair isle or color work, I'm going to stick to the more structured side of the spectrum because that garment is going to have much clearer stitch definition, just simply by the fact that it's not going to kind of, you know, lose its shape. And if I want something that's a bit more relaxed or drapey or flowy, then I'm going to go to the other side of the spectrum. You know, those yarns that are kind of the alpaca or the mohairs. And, you know, if I'm not so concerned about stitch definition, those are yarns that I will consider. If I was making a cardigan or a jacket or something that needed to hold its shape, I would not use an alpaca. And I've done this before. I made a cardigan where I used alpaca and it grew quite a bit. And it's okay. Like, I actually like the oversized version of it, but actually I made this cardigan using an alpaca and it definitely did grow after I blocked it, but it's so soft. Like, I really love the alpaca for its softness. Because it has a lot of alpaca in the content, it tends to drape quite a bit. So both this and my other sweater definitely grew. So I would say with those yarns, I'm thinking they grew up to 20% in size after it's blocked. And then I also made this sweater using a superwash yarn. And again, like, it was kind of dumb because I had the yarn here, didn't plan it. I just wanted it in blue and I had this beautiful blue. So I started the project. Of course, I ran out and the color the dye lot 3 years later is going to be different. So unintentional color block. But anyway, this was meant to be a very oversized sweater, kind of a Baba dupe. And the problem is using the superwash, this thing really bloomed. I mean, not only is it going to bloom because it's superwash, but it grew quite a bit because of the weight of it. Like, it's quite a heavy sweater. So I love it in this case. The oversized version of it is quite amazing. But I fear that this is going to keep growing. So hopefully, you know, it lasts and it doesn't get so big that it swallows me up. But every project is a new lesson. So overall, I'm happy with this cardigan. I'm so happy I was able to use the superwash yarn for something. It's not so heavy that the distortion caused by the differing yarn fibers will be great. Like, I think it will hold its shape. But if I was to make this cardigan again, I would definitely pair the mecha with a yarn that's closer to it on the spectrum. So perhaps another superwash like the Baracco Ultra Wool in DK or the Estelle Superwash Merino in DK. This way the fibers behave the exact same way. Or if I wanted to add a little bit of structure but not go as rigid as the Peer Gynt, I could pick a soft merino like Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino or the Sanday's Garn Double Sunday. Both of these are non-superwash options, but are close enough on the behavior spectrum to work well. I don't think I would ever pair such a rustic yarn with a superwash again. It's just too great a variation. And I'm happy that I will be able to avoid this in the future just simply by referring to this framework and selecting yarns that sit closer to each other on the behavior spectrum. And I end up with a final garment where the fibers are working together harmoniously and not fighting each other. I'd never thought about the fibers beyond colors. I know it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but criteria, I normally go, okay, is it thick enough yarn and is the color working? And sometimes what happens is if the designer has chosen to work with a yarn that's maybe too expensive, or they've run out of the color that I want, or it's not available in Canada, then, you know, I'll be forced to find a different alternative. But I've never really thought about, does that alternative actually behave the way that the designer intended? And so those are the things that I'm going to think about moving forward. And I think it's going to help me choose better alternative yarns. I think it's going to work a little bit better for my decision-making process. So Hopefully this helps you too. I know it's been a great cheat sheet for me. I went to Knit City over the weekend, the big yarn festival here in Toronto, and actually having done that work, that spectrum was in the back of my mind, and it actually helped me pick yarn based on behavior, not just color, because I will admit I was like a kid in the candy store. The colors are what I'm drawn to first, but I was able to make a much more informed decision with yarn that I know will behave the correct way for the projects that I have in mind. So hopefully that helps you too. I love geeking out on this stuff. I'll continue to make mistakes and learning from them. I'm here for it. I don't mind spending a lot of time learning when it comes to knitting. Let me know if I've missed anything or if you have any other questions. Hopefully you find this helpful. Hope you're having a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.